The financial engine of Rome. The Roman Empire was not built on heroism alone. In fact, it was built, at least in part, on debt. When we think of the armies of the Roman Empire, we usually imagine steady, courageous warriors. Iron armor, sharp swords, a powerful unity. But in the background of that atmosphere, there was a massive and costly plan. Think about it. A multitude of warriors needs to be fed. They have swords. They have salaries. They need roads built for transport. They have mounts, and those mounts have expenses. They have siege engines. Wood and craftsmanship are required to build them. Everything points toward a single objective: money, and a lot of money. Despite all this, how did the Roman Empire manage the finances of this long-lasting struggle? And a more crucial point: what kind of relationship does this situation have with today? Because if we look closely at Rome's war plan, an interesting situation emerges. The struggle wasn't just on the battlefield, it was right in the heart of finance. Once this algorithm started working, it became impossible to stop. For the Roman Empire, expanding its borders ceased to be a choice. It turned into a financial necessity. Does this remind you of anything? Let's go back in time for a moment. In the early days of the Roman Empire, the army actually consisted of the public. If you were a landowner, you could apply to the military. People brought their own equipment, went to war, and when the war was over, they returned to their pastures. However, as the Roman Empire expanded, the situation changed. Wars took longer. They went to more distant foreign lands. It was now very difficult to just pick up a sword, go to war for a short time and come back. Professional units were needed. That is exactly when Rome started paying its troops. The salaries were not massive, but they were enough to ensure loyalty. Following this, an important development occurred. Victories themselves turned into a revenue stream. What happened when a new territory was gained? Fresh taxes, fresh people, fresh ores, fresh tributes. In other words, wars began to finance new wars. A self-sustaining system was formed. But there's an even stranger side to the story. The Roman Empire didn't rely solely on taxes. At the same time, it borrowed heavily. Especially during the long and expensive Punic Wars with Carthage, Rome borrowed large sums from wealthy individuals, specifically from the state's elite class. And this money wasn't just given away. The wealthy were investing. Those affluent people gave their wealth, but in return they expected financial returns, interest, tax collection rights, and financial privileges in newly conquered lands. Thus, wars turned into a kind of money-making tool, and the more money this system generated, the more wars were waged. Does this system look familiar to you? Over time, this situation transformed the state. Power and wealth shifted to the generals. Senators turned into investors profiting from wars. Groups called Publicani, essentially corporations of wealthy individuals, took on tasks ranging from logistics to tax collection and amassed fortunes from these roles. In a sense, a military-industrial financial system emerged within the state, but this situation had a cost for the state. The state had to pay the army's wages. It had to pay the interest on the debts it took. The Roman Empire constantly had to find a new source of revenue. When conquest took too long or when rebellions broke out, the state treasury fell into a dire state, and the Roman Empire resorted to an old trick: debasing the currency. During the reign of Emperor Nero, they secretly reduced the amount of silver in the coins. The emperors who ruled afterward continued to do the same. In other words, the people saw the money as the same, but its value was actually dropping steadily. The result? Inflation. Public trust in the currency vanished. By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire's monetary system had seriously collapsed. During this time, the wealthy were able to protect their money through land, slaves, and different types of investments. But for the common people, the situation was much worse. Taxes increased. The value of their money plummeted, and the burden of endless wars increasingly fell on the shoulders of the people. This was not just a military problem, it was a financial one. Now, look at today. States with massive budget deficits, wars financed by borrowing, central banks trying to keep states afloat by printing money, corporations making billions from defense contracts, and usually the public who carries the burden of inflation. It's certainly not exactly the same, of course, but some similarities are truly striking. The Roman Empire teaches us something valuable. A financial system built on conquest eventually becomes unsustainable. There are no new lands left to expand into. New mines to be excavated run out, and the system begins to collapse. That is exactly what happened in Rome. Taxes increased. The silver content in the coins decreased even further. To keep the people quiet, rations were distributed. Meanwhile, the rich continued to protect their own spoils. Does this sound familiar? Today, we don't call it tribute. We call it tax. We call it the monetary system. We call it financial expansion. But the system isn't that different. Central banks print money. Governments spend more than they earn. The wealthy buy assets. Ordinary people struggle against a life that becomes more expensive over time. Conflicts are still financed with borrowed money. For example, the U.S. spent over $2 trillion on the Afghanistan war, and a huge portion of this money was debt. So who makes money from this system? Who provides the loans? Who earns the interest? Who pays the price in the end? The answer to this is not very hard to guess. And just like in the Roman Empire, this system continues. Once debt becomes a normal part of the system, you don't need a massive crisis to inject money into it. You just need to keep the cycle alive. That's why financial history is important. These aren't just old stories. They are warnings. Rome shows us this. When a system becomes addicted to expansion, when money loses its value, and when debt grows uncontrollably, the society eventually pays the price. Today's world may be different, more digital, more global. But some rules are still the same. Money and power move together. War is still profitable. Inflation still affects the weakest the most. And financial systems often look normal right up until they collapse. So, what should we do in this situation? Above all, we can try to understand this cycle. The public doesn't often think about what causes inflation. They don't question the cycle of borrowed money. But once you start to see this cycle, everything becomes a bit clearer. You can't completely opt out of this cycle. But by knowing it, you can live more consciously. Economic education is not just about investing. It's about understanding power. It's about understanding the cycle. And sometimes it's about asking ourselves a simple question. Who profits when I don't understand how this system works? Because most of the time, the system doesn't want the public to ask these questions. But once you understand the system, you can no longer ignore it. And time teaches us this. States usually don't fall because an enemy destroyed the gate. They fall when the system no longer works. To master the future, you must decode the past. Subscribe to the Mintory, and I'll see you in the next chapter.